What's up, guys? Welcome back to Alex's channel. Today we are going to be talking poetry. I'm Dyson Smith. This is, do you say your full name on your channel?
It's fine. Yeah.
This is AG. I know him as Alex G.
That's what they call me.
Alex. Well, is it Alex G? That's a rapper, yeah? You do your professional intro.
Yeah.
We've done this 3 times, by the way.
We've done this 3 times.
I keep making him restart. He's like this organic
I
guy.
always do things one take, but we're doing multiple this time. We are talking about Diane Seuss for this first chunk. Then we're going to get lunch. Then we'll be back.
We're just doing the Diane Seuss chunk
Then
first?
we'll be back with
Jesus' Son.
Jesus' Son by Denis Johnson. But Modern Poetry is the main collection we're going to be talking about. Diane Seuss's first poetry collection. Not first. Diane Seuss's most recent poetry collection. As well as Frank Sonnet, some stuff you have pulled up online.
Yes.
And then some of those short stories. Dyson's going to read his own poems. He's a mega published poet. Incredible writer.
Thanks.
Future poet laureate of the U.S. right here.
How do we know each other?
Yeah. Oh, yes. We went to high school together. Played on the basketball team.
You should make like an edit of like all the different ways you've introduced me. You're like Dyson Smith.
Dyson
like
Smith.
you're like slightly moving every time because it's from a different take.
Okay,
Sorry.
We played basketball freshman and sophomore year together, and then we took a creative writing class together senior year where we wrote poetry and fiction. And we've been writing ever since, sending stuff back and forth. This is my guy, great writer.
The first take he said this is my brother, but
this
now
is my brother.
Now that he's
making all these demands of me, I have to. He's my guy.
I had to make 2 demands. I had 2 simple demands.
But yeah, so we're gonna start talking about Diane Seuss, who is a really interesting person. This is a really interesting collection. I don't have Frank Sonnets, which I think is your favorite of hers, but we have some of those pulled up. So if you want to start, talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Okay,
with her.
So Diane Seuss, I first found her poem, Modern Poetry, in the Best American Poetry 2023 anthology, and I thought it was fascinating how she positioned herself as a poet, as like an award-winning poet within the grand scheme, a Pulitzer Prize winner, like in the grand scheme of poetry. I thought it was just like brilliant how honest she was. Like she had very honest admissions, almost like walked us through poetry, like what it was to her, how she came in contact with it, and like how it evolved her way of thinking about poetry, her way of writing, why she writes the way she does. A common question is why speak differently? Why a lot of people write poetry and think about poetry. And I think Diane is very hyper aware of that because of her own life experience, which she doesn't refrain from talking about. I think Frank Sonnets is a largely autobiographical collection, and Modern Poetry talks a lot about, it's like autobiographical but in a different way. Like she'll still talk about her life, her own unique experiences, but it's positioned to be in contact with poetry. Like what does her life mean? Like what does her life tell us about poetry? How is something that she recognizes as inglamorous, undeserving of what she has now, how is that in form? How is that out of form? Like how does that take shape? And
even more so with this collection, because it's all like a reckoning with like, does poetry actually matter? Why does it matter? Like how does it matter to her? You talked a lot about the different forms she uses, like the sonnet, but kind of making it her own thing.
Yeah. I think it's really important to talk about the forms Diane Seuss uses, because she's written like Villanelle's. She's written, I guess her whole. I'll just talk about the sonnets book, because the sonnets book is all 14-line poems, but they're not in iamb. They're not ABA whatever.
Rhyme schemes, yeah.
They don't end in a couplet. It's just 14 lines. Like that's the constraint. But they make their own type of music within them. See, I've said that one before, but it's true. It's true because she embraces her diction. She embraces her unique observations. She embraces the way she moves through her life. Like all that is embraced. There is some inner rhymes in there, but it's about like honestly, I guess, coming into contact with yourself in the greater scheme of your life.
Well, with this book especially, I don't have as much context with the Frank Sonnets, but what I found the most interesting, and we did talk a bit about this poem, I don't know if you want to read it again. Or,
no.
Okay.
I don't know how you do your editing, like maybe it's like on the screen right here. No, I'm kidding. Like
right here.
Right over your face.
That's
but yeah, Modern Poetry, I think she talks about learning poetry academically, which is a whole other thing, because what makes a poet academic? Like that, there's all these typifications of poetry where it's been gatekept from certain people, but also like what poetry represents symbolically is kind of like this like highbrow stuff. Some people, like I've talked to family members and they're like, oh, I could just never get poetry.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, oh, it's too, you know, metaphoric, it's too hyperbolic, like it's all these, you know, huge adjectives that kind of make things less clear. But Diane's not trying to confuse you, and I think that's what she's saying. She's coming into contract with poetry.
She could do everything.
Yeah. She's skilled. She's read, like, to write you need to read, and she's read probably more than any of us in terms of poetry, and that's why she can write a book like Modern Poetry. But she's talking about her experience in this poem as a young person, as an undergraduate, as someone older than an undergraduate. Like, it walks through many years of her life learning poetry, kind of being caught up in that headspace of, even though I love this, like, this isn't for me. This isn't for people like me. Diane Seuss, as someone that grew up in poverty, born in Indiana, but lived in rural Michigan, Midwestern as hell in all the best ways, she feels it wasn't for her. And then she comes into contact with things that resonate. She starts being able to, like, I don't know, she's just very honest in her assertions about herself, and it makes her, I just think she's so cool. I just think Diane Seuss is the coolest.
With that's a great way to put it. With this, it's interesting, like, the community of women, especially after one of them passes away. Yeah.
Well, it wasn't about the books.
It wasn't about the books as much as the community. The books had become more and less important. Yeah. She mentions, again, so, like, feeling like a charlatan, a fraud, as she puts it. And being called a charlatan. But then seeing, like, so here she talks about a couple different poems. I appreciated the greenhouse poems. And then, you know, seeing where this guy actually grew up, feeling like as a college student, like, these greenhouse poems were like somewhere far away, she couldn't
somewhere glorious.
And she went to where he lived, and it was the same as hers. So everybody's a quack, everybody's a fraud, and everybody's, you know, faking it till they make it.
She talks about faking it till you make it, because, like, you feel. And, you know, people talk about this in academia all the time, no matter what they study. Imposter syndrome, like not feeling worthy, feeling out of place. And in poetry, something that has been so historically gatekept. Not even, like, now, when it's still, those historical gatekeepings that have, like, ridiculed the past, like, those are still happening today. But also, like, what we talk about when we talk to people and they're like, I don't get poetry.
Yeah.
And, like, that's just, like, what poetry represents symbolically. It's hard to not feel like a quack when you're writing poetry. You're like, I'm not,
like, I don't understand.
I'm not Chaucer, you know. It's over intellectualized, and she, you know, as a smart, all these modern poets are incredible. Like, honestly, I think Nate Marshall does really similar things in his book, where it's like you. Shout
out Nate Marshall.
Shout out to Nate Marshall. Someone said,
fantastic professor, even better poet.
Yeah, but it's just.
I love this line here. The professor made us read Sunday morning, which struck me as long.
Yeah, it didn't move me. It struck me as long. It's a long poem, like, and that's all it was to me, because maybe nothing resonated. Maybe if it did, it took a while. But it's like, it was just long. I'm not gonna write an academic essay about this thing that didn't have, like, I don't know. She's so honest in her assertions, and it really contextualizes who she is, and, like, what that meant, what poetry meant for her, because what it meant for her is something she wanted but felt like she couldn't attain, felt like she couldn't reach, and now she still has this tone of, like, I'm undeserving of this because this wasn't meant for me. This life I lived wasn't meant for me, and I don't know. She really embraces who she is, her vernacular dialect, the things she experienced in her life, and, like, how that makes her a poet, how that makes her Diane Seuss. She's not trying to be anyone else, which is fucking obvious, but excuse me. I have such a potty mouth.
I mean, yeah, she talks about even feeling like, you know, Sylvia Plath would wipe the floor with her because she wrote a thesis on Dostoevsky. She'd hate me. She'd think I'm whatever. But at the end, you know, finding her place. I'm not complaining. It was all more than I deserved. The goat, the greenhouse, the liberated blonde badass on her motorcycle, Sula, surfacing, Sunday morning, ripe plums, my education.
Yeah, saying your education was more than you deserved is just, like...
It was crazy.
I just think it's, like, it shows that what she thinks of herself, and, like...
She has this poem called My Education as well.
Yeah, this is the one we should read fully.
Take it away.
Not just what I feel, but what I know and how I know it. My unscholarliness, my rawness, all rise out of the cobbled landscape I was born to. Those of you raised similarly, I want to say it. This is not a detriment and it is not a benefit. It only is, it is, like a cobbled house is, field stones and mortar, slipshod, spare parts welded crookedly, crudely but cleverly, skinny iron winding staircase leading up to the attic, bolted on both ends, and up there, a gap in the window where the snow comes in and architects a little drift on the bed. And meals were cobbled, kernels on the cob, haphazardly arranged, not lined up in military rows, and sometimes a row was not filled in at all, and your teeth, when biting down, met an emptiness, and shotgun pellets in the rabbit meat. Stray hobnail dishes, studded rescued from an abandoned house on fire, and an array of jewel tones, would appear without warning on the table. A blood-colored butter dish, yellow perch on a coblet blue platter encircled in fried egg sacks, or ducks or a pheasant thrown erratic on the back porch, payment for something given or not taken. When I'd been away and returned, I could see freshly the cobbled lushness of the trees and the arbitrary drift of brown spots on the white cows in the meadows and the wireworm-filled tunnels in the morals at the base of dead cherry trees. The cemetery is as unsystematic as the library, graves scattered like chicken feed, books strewn on old tables from canceled Sunday school classrooms. I loved books but learned very little in school. I could read, so the reading instructions drew me nearly mad, and I plugged my ears, first with my hands until I was caught, then with something I could do inside my head that muffled the teacher's voice like she was speaking into a canning jar. What I know of literature, of history, is spotty. I was a poor student disengaged from the things I didn't need and knew what I needed. And the time to get it was now. When I needed Keats, I got him. I read enough to get the point, then turned to his ghost. I read most of Joseph Conrad, having figured out that I could find some things repulsive and still require them for my project. My project was my life. There was no vision or overarching plan. There was only foraging for supplies, many of which were full of worms or covered in dust, like apples on the orchard floor and furniture junked on the side of the road. Have you ever seen a pie cooling on the still and found yourself hungry enough to steal it? Or does that only happen in picture books? If you are like me, to learn of the gods, you must beg, borrow, or steal. Eavesdrop, as gossip is a sagacity, a word I learned from Emily Dickinson. Don't underestimate direct experience. Ants no earth. Dragonflies no air. A cobbled mind is not fatal. You have to be willing to self-educate at a moment's notice, and to be caught in your ignorance by people who will use it against you. You will mispronounce words in front of a crowd. It cannot be undone. But your poems, with all their deficiencies, products of lifelong observation and asymmetric knowledge, will be your own. Built on the tradition, they have rarely been anthologized. I have camped at this outpost my whole life, as did my mother, who slept on sugar slacks in the basement or on the front porch in the early spring when snow clumped around fugitive crocuses just to keep herself forsaken. What a poem. It's so telling. It's so telling. And it's just she's not trying to elevate herself, to elevate her diction. She's going to come at you authentically with who she is as a skilled poet who knows what poetry represents, who knows who it's been gatekept from, who doesn't feel deserving of the life she has, who feels that like her path in academia isn't the linear one, isn't the one that a lot of poets have been successful with and have taken. There's the linear going to college, then MFA after, like that wasn't her direct path, and she feels like she is a symbol of that. And I love how she turns to the imperative tense here when she's like she starts addressing the reader. Like, you have to be willing to educate at a moment's notice and to be caught in your ignorance by people who will use it against you. So she's saying like her education's cobbled, but she couldn't have it any other way, and like that has made her who she is as a writer and as a person. And yeah, I think I don't know, AJ, what do you think?
I mean, that's a really interesting point you make too with the college MFA. You basically have like oftentimes like the first 4 years of your writing are what make or break if you're going to be a writer or not, which is crazy because I mean she's 55, 68, and is like just hitting her stride with this stuff. I know you said she published something when she was young, but most of the stuff didn't come out until she was...
Her first book, she didn't get published until she was 42, and she's winning the Pulitzer Prize in her 60s.
Yeah.
So I think...
It's like, well, your writing isn't
li-
good enough when you're 22,
a,
so
a
sorry,
life
no.
it's a lifelong of asymmetric knowledge. What makes asymmetric knowledge? It's not being in these privatized classrooms where you're learning about Chaucer or you're learning about.
She has real life experience.
Yeah, it's the life experience for her came before the poetry did, and all the poetry wasn't relatable until she could see it, until she could go to the place, she could see the greenhouse, she could see the ruralness, and she could position herself in it. So I think modern poetry is a commentary on once again herself, because it's always semi autobiographical. She touches on the details of her life, what she can remember. Her mother sleeping on sugar sacks.
Her dad.
Whatchamacallit? Shell casings in the rabbit meat. Stuff that you can't make up.
Yeah.
You can't make up unless you've lived it. It's just so carefully constructed. All of these poems are so carefully constructed, and in their sensibilities, I think she's able to navigate through a ton of different topics, because if we're thinking of a blanket, she's not grabbing the blanket and twisting it. She's going over it like that.
I like it.
It's not. I can't.
No,
I can't be super academic about it.
But that's the point.
Modern poetry, it's written in quatrains, and jammed and then stop lines. You could you could break it down like that, but that's not what it is.
Yeah,
it's I don't know. I need to stop saying I don't know. I'm pissing myself off.
But that's the point. It is kind of an investigation of, one, is poetry important? Two, why is it important, and how can it be important now, and how can we move away from this it's I think one of the writers I talk about a lot here, Edward P. Jones, says to his students, people tend to believe that the writing is for the people up on the mountaintop, up on the pedestal, and I've never believed that. And he's always my mom didn't know how to read or write, and here I am, winning all these awards for writing. It's something entirely different. Everybody can do it, and obviously, she's exceptional proof of that. Yeah. And so while she's Cece,
dude, we were just hitting our stride.
I know, what the heck, Cece.
Diane Seuss.
Downstairs, Cece. So it's both an investigation of poetry itself, but like you said, it's also, using all these. The most heartbreaking one for me, I forget what the name of the poem is, but she's talking about her dad.
Oh, pop song.
Yeah, her dad is. She's seen her dad in a dream, and her dad who died when she was 3 or something, is disappointed. She's not beautiful enough, or she's
to
not.
A dead man. A living daughter must be such an overwhelm.
Yeah.
Is the line from the poem.
Yeah.
I just think. I think sonnets, I think Frank Sonnets set up this book really well, because Frank Sonnets was heavily autobiographical. She could have I think she could have touched on all the same subject matter in perfect formed sonnets that she did in Frank Sonnets, but she didn't. Because she sees her educational path as broken, as cobbled, so she's going to use these broken forms. And when she adheres to them, she's not going to be talking about the glamour. She's going to be talking about the ruralness. I don't know. It's not.
We see it to a greater extent with our writing, but she had referred to Frank Sonnets as being, innocent. Something she wrote 5 years ago or whatever it is. She's well, I didn't understand, or I wasn't investigating the right things. So it's all kind of building upon each other. And there's different, bigger, more or less innocent questions that she's dealing with, even as heavy as both of the collections are. Do you want to read one of the Frank Sonnets?
Yeah. Yeah. I could talk about this poem a lot.
Yeah. Why don't you just go ahead with that, and we can.
We're never gonna wrap up Diane, dude. She's tricking us.
Yeah, she's tricking us. We're just gonna be here forever. No, we'll talk about this one. Get some food, and we'll come back and finish.
Okay.
Food. I need food.
I saw a little movie of a person stroking a small bird with 2 Q-tips, one held between the forefinger and the thumb of each hand. It tipped back its head to receive the minor tenderness, which to the bird must have felt like being touched by a god. For a moment I knew what it would be to feel at the mercy of love. Small scale, the kind shown but not spoken of. I was afraid to touch you. I was afraid of the lesions you described to me over the phone. There are locations in the measurement and centimeters of each. Jesus marks, you called them. also I would be prepared and unafraid or less afraid, but I was still afraid of dying like you were of dying. When I first arrived, I looked so long into your eyes, you shivered and ordered me to look away. You were imperious in your dying, yet courtly about my fear. You understood, as if I were a child afraid of lightning storms, which I am, having been struck at age 10. Out of the blue, you said that once you were dead, I'd never be able to listen to Blue again. Joni Mitchell's Blue, not just the song, but the whole album. It was a minor curse you lay across my shoulders like a fur-dyed blue, and so now I listen in defiance of you. And listening the pronoun shifts. We are listening. There is no death. I mean, that poem is just, I could draw like a roadmap for it. Like, we start with a bird with 2 Q-tips, and then it goes to love and picturesque, like what a love looks like, what a love feels like. And then it's touch. So she's like the kind shown but not spoken of. So it's like something unreachable, and then it approaches the you. I was afraid to touch you. That's how she gets from touch to you. And then it's you, the health of the you, the changing health of the you, because it's over the phone. It's the thing spoken of, not felt. And then like it's just so interesting because how you could start the poem anywhere here, but like she's just so carefully constructed and methodical in her approach to poetry that like it starts with the person stroking the bird. So the poem could start with, when I first arrived, I looked so long at your eyes, you shivered and ordered me away. I mean, like, what a detail that is. But like, there could be a whole poem about that. You know what I mean? You could describe the person physically, you could describe what you felt, but like, all that matters is that moment, and you get there from the bird. So we're going bird and Q-tips to love, picturesque love that can't be felt, then tangible touch, being scared to touch someone. Now we're at the you and their health issue, and this you is obviously gone. Because you were afraid of dying like you were dying. Then it's death. Then Diane recognizes this person is dead.
Then there is no death.
You were imperious and you're dying. Out of the blue, you said that once you were dead, I'd never be able to listen. And then she's like, now I listen.
I do listen, yeah.
But then there is no death.
Yeah, because we are listening.
Listening, the pronoun shifts. So that's why it's so interesting that it starts with I. The poem starts with I, as a lot of poems in this book do. It starts with I. It works through her own sensibilities to get to the you. Then when it's almost like she's so honest in her assertions that she can't escape not talking about the you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like she couldn't just say, she couldn't get off of touch without thinking about this you. Like, a love I can't touch. I was afraid to touch you.
And we were just talking about this with the Natalie Shapiro poem. But
to get off?
Yes, the way it starts with that image, and then it gets to what they're really getting at, which is the person. It's kind of, I don't know if that's the same thing here, but it seems kind of like that to me.
It goes, I experience this, I feel this, then to you, but then it's like, it's not about you, it's us.
Yeah.
And we're never gonna die.
Yeah.
I listen in defiance of you. And like, there's such a love in that. It's so easy to say you love someone and to acknowledge them, but to say like, in defiance of you, I'm doing this to keep you alive.
Because the emotions are so interesting. There's the one that ends with, what do you want from me? What did you ever want from me?
Yeah, I love, that's why I'm saying it's so calculated. It's so, the way it unfolds, the way Diane Seuss's poems unfold, it's like, if you read the first sentence, you wouldn't know where it goes from there. But it's all interconnected.
She gets to the heart of what she's really feeling, which I wonder if she has any idea where she's going when she starts. Because
it's so much momentum.
It all starts with, it's like, and
that's why the Sonnets book is beautiful, because you know there's constraint there. It's only going to be 14 lines long, and sometimes they're sonnets in their form because they're 14 lines, but like they function as prose because the word goes to the end of the page. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it can be a slimmer poem, but a lot of times it's just prose that's 14 lines. So you know there's an ending there. So there's like this momentum that's going to be in the poem no matter what, because it only has 14 lines. It can't stretch across multiple pages.
Covers so much.
Like modern poetry does. So you know there's going to be this momentum. You know there's going to be this change. And it's almost like she gets to a point in her poems where she has to acknowledge something. like you can't move on without this. She can't think about touch without how she was scared to touch her friend. And then, gosh, it's just so brilliant. It just shows such an intimacy between the speaker and the other in this poem, because it's so easy to proclaim love, like I said, but like to say you're defiant of someone, and to say like you tried to be understanding of this person's health situation, but like you were scared because like what the media said or what the doctor said, you were scared. And you know, you want to honor someone's dying wish, you want to protect their word, but it's like, I know I'm going to keep you alive by going against what you said. It's just brilliant. And yeah, I think I get to repeating myself because I'm so passionate about her work, but it's
no, it's really cool.
She just I think I've read this poem 100 times in my life, but it's so incredible. Love Diane.
Even wrote incredible.
Yeah,
the annotation.
My only annotation on this poem is, let me make it full screen to protect my identity. It just says, I don't know if the camera will pick it up, I don't think it will. It just says incredible.
Just says incredible. That, I mean, she's really cool, and someone who I don't think I'd heard of until like 2 months ago. Yeah, thanks to you. The Seussian.
The Seussian.
The Seussian.
Not a Dr. Seussian, though.
No, Diane Seussian.
Doctor, is it? We'll talk about stuff.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Anyways. Yeah. Okay. We're gonna take a break, and we will be back with some Denis Johnson.
Yeah.
And maybe something. Oh, and yes, and your poetry, of course.
No.
Of course.
Oh, I said one last note about Seuss. She shows poetry is for everyone, and the overarching takeaway, I think, from us reading her work and having an open discussion about it is that she's like, her restraint is always purposeful. And I think if you read the titles of her poems of modern poetry, the sonnets aren't titled, but it's like it shows a lot of what she stands for and like what the poems mean symbolically, like against poetry, modern poetry. You know, how do you define those things? And they're all arbitrary. They're not all defined like in totality. They can be whatever you want them to be. So I think poetry's for everyone. She goes against the gatekeeping of poetry. That's what I think Diane Seuss does.
And against poetry is interesting because it's kind of what it sounds like, and it's included in a poetry collection by a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet. It's just funny.
Against poetry.
But yeah.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant.
Yeah, it is really well done.
Speaking of...
Yes. Anyways, we are back.
Speaking of well done, but like...
Speaking of well done, but really weird.
Disgusting.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, pretty disgusting guy going on here. I mean, you've read this whole collection, right?
Yeah, I've read Jesus' Son.
So, Jesus' Son, stories by Denis Johnson, who is someone I really don't think I've read him before. But your favorite was Dirty Wedding, which we'll talk about. But do you have anything you wanted to touch on with like the collection as a whole? Like you said, there's just one character for all of them, right?
Yeah, the main protagonist in the story, you never even learn his name. And it's interesting because a lot of fiction, you know, has like built-in chronology. It's a story, but these are short stories, but around the same person, as AG just said. But you don't know like where you are. The speaker is purposefully very confused and very disoriented with time, with himself, with location, and it's built off of, I know, who Denis Johnson was as a young person, because he had a lot of substance abuse problems, and in the book the protagonist has serious substance abuse problems, so that I think he wanted that to be clear and kind of alter the perspective. And across the book you only know the character as Fuckhead, and he does a lot of bad things and he's around a lot of bad circles, but in the end there's like some redeem to the character. It's like what makes this person lovable, and like how is like I think a lot of what it touches on, like beyond what the book is like how do we love people when it's hard to love them, or like what is lovable in people. So I thought it's a super interesting approach to like the whole book is character building. It's building the character of F-Head through like these different stories of his life, and then by the end you're like, here's what he did, here's how he changed. And it's not a story, it's stories.
Yeah. I mean, this is the Dirty Wedding is fascinating. I would highly recommend reading that. We might spoil it a little bit, but
yeah.
I mean, it is.
Warning.
It is so well done, and and this back thing where it says reading these stories is like reading ticker tape from the subconscious. That's what it feels like. He's so like it gives you like a weird feeling like you're moving through this. The way you're moving through him is kind of like how he's moving through himself, because it feels like
you're there
like,
with him.
Yeah,
you're there with him because
such a nutty.
When we're walking through the world, like we're processing things, and a lot of writing is like already been processed because it's scene setting.
Mm-hmm.
That's like he's still figuring out the scene.
Yeah, exactly.
In the writing, and he's like doing this recollection that's also like it's confusing because he's telling a story, and sometimes he's in first person, and then he'll be like, but 5 years later I figured out this, and 2 years before this I was this, and was I actually here? It's it's how people actually think, and it's how we connect memories, and it's really like I wouldn't say stream of consciousness, but I'd say like you know that one book you showed me like a week ago where there was that super long paragraph.
David Foster Wallace.
Yeah, David Foster Wallace.
Yeah.
It's not similar because the sentences can be very short for Denis Johnson.
But it's the head voice.
It's a voice. Yeah, it's a very strong. It's a very strong speaker voice. You could tell Denis Johnson, he's a poet. As well, and you can tell. A lot of people. I know there's like a New York Times article about the first sentence of Dirty Wedding, and some people, and you as a more fiction oriented writer than me, might appreciate. Some people say this is the best sentence. Wow. I like to sit up front and ride the fast ones all day long. I liked it when they brushed right up against the buildings north of the loop, and I especially liked it when the buildings dropped away into that bombed out squalor a little farther north, in which people through windows you'd see a person in his dirty naked kitchen spooning soup towards his face, or 12 children on their bellies on the floor watching television, but instantly they were gone, wiped away by a movie billboard of a woman winking and touching her upper lip deftly with her tongue, and in turn she erased by a wham, the sudden noise, dark drop down around your head, tunnel, actually lived.
Yeah,
where people actually lived.
And half of that is in parentheses.
And he's honestly like a jerk for that perspective. Like it's like a really mean thing to say about people. You're talking about 12 kids.
You learn he's an awful guy.
Yeah, he's like, and I was talking to you about this last week. In research, there's this thing called like subject. Like when you make something a subject, it's like it's bad research practice because you're treating that as like they are different from me. And he does this a lot in this book. It's like almost everyone is a subject to him, and he like almost you're like, why is this dude so judgmental? And he's doing all these terrible things, and he doesn't understand like how people get to these, these marginalized spaces, these like tough situations, what drives people towards addiction, what drives people towards, crowded housing, and, calling an area where someone lives bombed out squalor, like that's objectively a terrible thing to say. Yeah. But like, this is this character's perspective.
Yeah, and it's interesting. And you would think that a writer, while writing this, would have to recognize.
Yeah. But it's it's separate from the writer almost. It's like, and not to give Denis Johnson like freedom of passage to say whatever he wants, but it's just like it's just very interesting how the speaker, like, you read it and it's a fascinating sentence. I mean, it's literally a paragraph long sentence.
Yeah.
But it's the speaker like has a distaste for this. We have a distaste for the speaker. Like, it's very hard to find redeem in the speaker throughout the book. I was 25, 26, something like that. My fingertips were all yellow from smoking.
Yeah, and then he's like, it cost 50 cents, 90 cents, $1 to ride the train. I really don't remember. Like, who
but he remembers bombed out.
Yeah. And with the, so the story takes place at an abortion clinic where he's taking his girlfriend, who is pregnant, and he could not care less about her.
Yeah, he's a total jerk.
But
he's confused.
At the same time, like, there's people shaking drops of holy water at him and her as they walk into this clinic, and he's just like, what the hell is going on? She goes back with the nurse. I mean, after the nurse comes out, he's like, is she dead?
Yeah, he has no sense of what's right and wrong.
I kind of wish she was dead. Like, what a crazy thing to say. And then they kick him out. I mean, it is so well written, but again, like, even just talking about this, I'm like, holy,
you're gonna put this on YouTube. He has like the speaker has this like objective perspective where like he's just giving his honest thoughts, which aren't nuanced about things. Like, he's just taking things as what he sees them to be. And it's like, it's so fundamentally wrong and it's not critical thinking at all. But, like, his reality is just, like, what it is. And he can't even make sense of it.
No.
So he's just almost, like, word vomiting.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, you're at Thanksgiving and, you know, a relative saying stuff you don't like. You're like, what the hell? You know what I mean?
It's like, it's hard to even, but it's like an incredible reading experience.
I stepped into one of the cars just as the doors closed, as though the train had waited just for me.
And then
you know what I mean? It's like he almost feels like he's chosen. And
he stalks that guy.
Yeah, so it starts with him going to the abortion clinic. He's being, he likes to ride the fast ones up front. He's talking about the Chicago trains that go in the loop, and he's saying once you actually go into the neighborhoods of Chicago, it doesn't look like, you know, the beautiful downtown with these huge buildings. He said where people actually live, like no one actually lives downtown. He can't recognize the people downtown. His situation is probably more similar to what the people he's saying are living in bombed out squalor, but like it's like the way he says it is just, it's so insensitive and like wrong. And then it's like, then you get to him talking about he's in the abortion clinic and he's so insensitive and wrong, and he gets kicked out because of it, and then he's back on the train. Like, it's like it didn't move him, you know. He just like, he goes yeah. That's what it is. He's not like, when we hurt someone's feelings, a lot of times it's like you have to sit and think about him, and you know, either, you know, give some time and think of an apology, or, you know, you have to sit with like, wow, I made this person feel bad. Yeah. He has none of that.
I mean, I'm not even gonna say what he said to her.
Yeah, it's terrible.
And then he just walks out. He's just drifting, and he stalks this guy. Then even when the guy recognizes that he's like following
he follows this guy off the train.
Well, I could have followed anybody. It would have been the same thing.
He follows this guy off the train. He's just drifting the whole way. He follows this guy off the train, and he's like aroused by him.
Yeah. His chest was like Christ. That's probably who he was.
That's probably, and there's such this uncertainty in the way he speaks. It's just, more than anything, it's a fascinating read, but you have to read it with a grain of salt, because I think Denis Johnson is a bastard, but more than anything, I think the character in this book is an even bigger one.
That's interesting.
And he ends up, you know, he stalks the guy, then he goes back on the train, and, you know, he's riding around the streets, and
this part where he's talking about her, when we were arguing on my 24th birthday, she left the kitchen, came back with a pistol, and fired it at me 5 times from right across the table. But she missed. It wasn't my life she was after, it was more.
Yeah. She wanted to eat my heart.
And be lost in the desert with what she'd done. She wanted to fall on her knees and give birth from it. She wanted to hurt me as only a child can be hurt by its mother. It's a really good story, but yes, everything you have to take into account, all these. I think that's what you told me. Like, this guy might be the worst person ever, but this is also the best story ever. Like, you have to.
Yeah, I think it's just interesting to come into contact with literature that has no stake in like being morally correct. And it's not like trying to be cool or edgy in that way. It's just like this. It's just who this person is. Mm-hmm. It's really just fascinating. It's a fascinating read. Some of the best sentences ever, and it does a good job on how humans process in, as our friend Diane would say, asymmetric ways. Because he's telling the story about him on the train, and then he gets back to Michelle. And, you know, Michelle and I had our drama. You know, she shot at me.
Yeah.
But
she wanted to eat my heart.
Yeah, but in the story, like, even the way he presents Michelle in the story, I think is like one of the most fascinating parts, because she is the one that is like, you know, people wanted her, but only I could love her.
Only I could love her.
So he's like, he has this image of himself that he's better than people, and he's not.
When she left for me permanently, or rather,
Yeah, you know, when she left me permanently, rather past. But like, even though Michelle shoots at him, in the book, Michelle does, you know, lots of drugs. Michelle helps him carry a dead body. Like, there's other stuff Michelle helps him do in the book that isn't like makes her out to be a good person, but she's like we see Michelle as like the hero in this story. Like I see Michelle as like when she shoots at him, it's like we like her.
Yeah,
we like that she shoots at him. Yeah, we do, and it's interesting how that develops. So I think this book is all about making like a picture of someone from just parts of them. You're not following a lifeline. You don't even really know what you're following. And that's what the character does here. He's just following stuff. Like he's wandering. It's a fascinating read. I would definitely recommend it.
Yes, I will get around to reading this whole book for sure. But Dirty Wedding's awesome.
Dirty Wedding, yeah.
To kind of finish this video off.
Yeah.
You want to talk about we have talked a lot. Hopefully you stuck around this far. That's gonna be the best part.
If you're around now, comment. No, I'm kidding.
Do you want to? I mean, I have your poem here, but you can pull it up.
Sure. What am I supposed to do with it?
Do you want to read this one?
Yeah, sure. So,
we can talk about it more after if you just want to read it first.
Yeah, I'll read it. This is my poem. It was recently published in the Madison Review, so shout out to them. It's called "Suddenly I Was Grabbed by a Sailor," and I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to talk about like the form and the intentions,
maybe some of the writing process.
Yeah, of course.
Sweet.
And thank you, my brother AG, for having me here. It's been a ball. Suddenly I was grabbed by a sailor. I'm telling you again about this repeated nightmare where I'm drunk driving my blue 2005 Jeep Gladiator, backing into the bar, backing into a spot already occupied by an '09 Volkswagen, and I never feel the impact but always back into and crush the buggy's headlights, smearing around its high beams with my license plate, leaving glass disarrayed, decorating the asphalt with sparkles. And I enjoyed picking up those shards, letting them run through my hands only to fall to concrete again. After I finish celebrating the mess I made, I always get back in the car and put it in reverse. Every time you listen with such intensity to the point where you can see me walk through my own dream in greater detail than I told it. I love watching you talk over our morning coffee, seeing that you believe in what I have to say, love this time together and communication with each other. You feed me what's in the cabinet, help me tie my shoes sometimes. Your earrings complement your eyes, and even if they didn't, they still would. It's an unbreathable sight to watch you put on your foundation, your big heart necklace in the morning. I'll share my cigarettes. You could be the poster child for any indoctrination, and I join with cultish fever. We can bathe each other, put each other to bed, sanitize each other's welts, sneak behind each other's back, end up in the same place, waive the lease on one of our apartments, or what apartment even is it, and call it in, squeeze the pus out of each other's abscesses, try again, all of this to say I'm terrified of the near future, where we will not be in each other's immediacy. Truthfully, there was never a nightmare. I don't dream much and never owned a truck or saw anyone in a night terror. Truthfully, I framed it all. The nightmare's chronology, the face I made after waking up in hopes that would bring us closer and you'd have the decency to be concerned for me and stick around a little longer. Truthfully, I almost proposed before I left for Texas, but couldn't bring myself to do that to us, and I'm sitting alone at Denis at 3 a.m. Yes, you were never here, but I've been talking out loud inside. I still want you like that Navy man returning from war, kissing his beloved. On the picture overhanging the clock at Denis, I put myself back in the driver's seat of my 2005 Jeep Gladiator, revving the engine once, and put it in reverse. Yeah, it was like a reading. It's fun.
That was great. This one's probably my favorite.
Thanks. I haven't read that poem forever.
Of yours, but yeah, I mean, so I actually didn't even realize that was what the title was at the end here. The picture, like suddenly I was grabbed by a sailor, but it's the photo from the war or whatever. I mean, yeah. Did you have anything like? What inspired you to write this? I mean, this is really interesting. I don't know if people can see this, but what do you even call this?
I'd say it's like 4 or 5 quatrains.
So there's a poem.
A huge prose block.
You probably can't pick up on this. Maybe I can over this.
So I think...
Yeah, huge prose block.
I actually did have a nightmare where I was like crashing a car and I was kind of happy about it. It was like a freeing experience. Yeah. It was like I messed up and it was just this really weird dream.
Yeah.
And that's not what the poem's about, but I sat with the dream for like 8 months, like trying to figure out what it means. I talked about it almost to the point where it became like a myth in my life.
Yeah.
Like this dream that I had. And I just thought it was like, at some point, when you're trying to break down your own life and what stuff means, like, it moves beyond the pronoun shifts. We are listening.
Yeah.
I just thought it was like, I thought it would be interesting because this dream was almost like a myth to me because I had recounted it, 100 more times than it happened. And this isn't like exactly what happened in the dream. Like it's, I took creative liberty with it. It's interesting because it frames the speaker of the poem in a way where it's like they're not this honorable person. They're drunk driving. And the way it speaks, they're smearing around high beams. They're not. It's not a bump. It's kind of like a bump and it's almost unintentional, but there's like a fun in it. There's a fun in crashing the car and then celebrating the mess I've made because you're playing with the glass and stuff. And I wanted to frame the speaker as someone that's like maybe needs help. And in fiction, there's a lot of play with unreliable narrator and people you can't trust. Like, is this narrator telling the truth? And I thought it was a really interesting concept to like undermine myself. Like, I think within the poem, not myself, the speaker. Like the speaker reveals that you're someone. The speaker reveals that they're someone you can't trust because they say they have this, infatuation with this person, and really this dream actually never happened. They just wanted something to talk about. But then they end up in the car at the end. So I wrote the part about the dream in like short 4-line quatrains, and then the part about the beloved in the poem is in a huge prose block. And I wanted that, like, the form to kind of emulate like the structure, like the dream. It's sequential, it happens, it seems real, but then it's not real, and there's this other person in the poem, and this person's gonna give it all up for him. They're gonna turn in the lease, they're gonna squeeze the pus out of each other's abscesses, they're gonna do it all for him, and they would lie to him to keep him. So I think, and it's an ekphrastic poem. It was about the famous picture of the man coming home from World War II, kissing a woman, and I guess like what's in question in the poem, what's at stake is like what will desire to drive you to do, and like how can that make you unreliable? I don't know. Do you have any questions about it specifically? Yeah. I wrote it like I can't even. I wonder if I had a document that I wrote it in to see like what happened.
Oh yeah, like the edit changes. Yeah. No, well, see, that's really interesting because I don't know. I didn't even really. I guess the unreliable narrator thing didn't really cross my mind, at least when I first read it.
I think it's a.
But I get what you're saying. I mean, I loved the prose block. I thought this was the best part, but I also loved how you went from this image to that. Like I keep coming back to this Natalie Shapiro thing, but that's just because you framed it a certain way that I haven't been able to. But like that whole like this image, and then like this guy's entire life. Basically,
you get to the subject,
which he wants like this girl to basically. Like he's coming home from war for this girl. Like it's like, but at the same time,
it's so dramatic.
It's so dramatic, and also I guess the unreliable part does come into question when I think about it because I was thinking about it this way. Like everything, it's basically her. She's gonna save him, or he's gonna, sit in a pile of broken glass and throw it up. And like it's such an interesting.
He's so desperate. I think what like my main point of that poem is like, I think. The part about the dream, I tried to write it in like a flowery way. I tried to use similes and metaphors, and I tried to, make it pretty. Like the dream, this dream that's kind of not like necessarily a cool thing, but I tried to make it pretty. I tried to make the writing flowery, but then it's like, if you're invested in that, none of it matters. That dream doesn't matter. It was never about the dream. Yeah. Like it was like the Shapiro poem. We could talk about that another time if I ever come back, because that we've already spent a lot of time with that poem. So we can talk about it, but
we will.
It's that's not like I created a whole thing just to say it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like that's not what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting.
And it's like it's almost like pointing. I think a lot of poetry is like you're placed somewhere in the world and you have to point. Like you're oriented a certain way, whether it's like you're pointing back, you're pointing forward, and you can point in multiple ways. Because it's like the summation,
Yeah.
the summation of a lot of things, historical events, macro level stuff, but also like your own personal narrative in that. And I think like it's interesting. It was an interesting challenge for me to construct something, to like act like that's the subject of the poem, and then undermine it and be like, this isn't real. This doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, I only did this because it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And when I say it's like a ubiquitous I. It's like the speaker's I.
Well, that's another thing that's interesting to me, because I think when a lot of people read poetry, it is the author talking. If Kaveh Akbar, right? Well, no. Like, I'm not saying it is. I'm saying that's how, like, it's read.
Yeah.
Like, if I read a Kaveh Akbar poem, I'm like, oh, he's talking from his experience. That's not... You keep saying the speaker. I think that's the same thing in fiction. Like, I like to differentiate, the narrator from especially if it's like I or whatever. I mean, when you read poetry, how do you reconcile like the difference between like what is autobiographical? Do you assume a certain thing? I feel like it's not separated enough.
That's a great question. I think poetry more than anything is like an art flick. It's like it does what conventional, and it can utilize conventional language. I think it's best when poetry is conversational and honest. It's not trying to use elevated language to seem a certain way. But I think poetry, like at its core, is like an art flick, and it creates like a space that you can step into and like walk through something. It's like it really is like a gallery almost, because it's like in here you're put into a space where you're walking through someone else's dream and you're being told what's happening. And all of a sudden, you're in this form, you're in these quatrains, and then that gets broken. Like, the space you're in gets, like, sliced in half.
Yeah.
And you're watching this dude, like, instead of the pace just goes like this, because it's a prose block with no punctuation. It's this and this and this and this. So it's like everything you knew is, like, falling down.
Yeah.
So I like to think of it as always a space. Like, when we were reading the Diane Seuss poem, My Education, it's we're walking through her and we're in these classes with her where she's, knee deep in the book trying to get it, and feels like it's not for her. She feels like it's unrelatable. Yeah. And then it starts picking up. It becomes relatable. It becomes something she can see herself in, and it becomes something that's digestible. And it doesn't even have to be relatable, but it's like she sees herself in these moments. So I think I always like... If you look at a body of work, you can see it as autobiographical. But I think like in each poem, there's a speaker and there's a different, even if it's like supposed to be from the person, like in Nate's book or Kaveh Akbar's book, where it's like they're the speaker, like in most of the poems.
Yeah.
But like I think even though it's related to them, it's like every poem is a different speaker, because it's coming from a different time. Like it's placing them in a space and they're pointing.
So it's not really the person; it's the space that you're in.
Yeah, the person's in. I mean, poetry is created in the reader's mind.
Yeah.
And some people like the way I write is like different, because like I grew up like on slam poetry, like in Chicago. So all my poems, I write them to be like read aloud. And like that's how I workflow, whether it's in form, out of form. Like I'd say this poem is in some sort of form, but it's like I don't think this form necessarily has a name.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's all about the space, because I think even though there's probably stuff from my life like the dream that is in this poem and in other poems, I think like it's just taking aspects of it.
Yeah.
And this isn't me now. This is me like. Am I making sense?
I get what you're saying.
You can ask questions to clarify.
It is part of you as the but it really it's the feeling, it's the place, and even if it is fully the author, it's not them anymore.
Yeah, and it's also like I'm not just like Dyson. Like I'm like Chicago, Illinois.
Yeah.
I'm like Davis, California. I'm like all the people that came before me.
Yeah.
So to be like, this is the same speaker in every poem. It's like it could be the same person,
that's interesting.
But it's different. It's a different speaker, because they're creating a different space for every poem. Each poem has its own unique space. They can interconnect with other poems. They can build momentum off other poems. But each one is creating their own space, which in turn makes them have a speaker. So I separate speaker from author always. But like you can look at a collection of work and be like author speaker, or you can look at it like there's no. And while I'm saying this is the most important thing. There's no correct way to read poetry. Just enjoy it. just appreciate that we're alive to, be in contact with these brilliant works and these brilliant authors, like Diane Seuss, like Kaveh Akbar, like Nate Marshall. It's just like, there's no right way to read poetry. And if they tell you that, that's the problem with poetry. It's been gatekept. It's been typified as like elite or like so hard or like, intellectual. And you can read it and enjoy it. You can read it and hate it. There's no correct way to do it. So this is just my objective perspective as someone that reads poetry and someone that writes it. And yeah, I think that's what I had to say.
That's a great note to end it on. This is probably 4 hours long.
No, dude, no. The Diane Seuss part, you're going to cut it down.
I'll cut it down a little bit. Yeah,
15 minutes.
Yeah.
Dude, we probably talked about Dennis Johnson for too long now, is it?
No. It's all good. I had an awesome time. I hope
I'll pay
had
you.
a good time too. Stop it. I had an awesome time. I hope you had a good time too.
Once we got the food in our system.
Yeah, we got the food. We were moving and grooving. If anybody's still left at this point, thank you so much for watching.
Dude, I'm so sorry. You have to edit all
no,
this.
it's gonna be awesome. I always like rewatching the videos, especially if people are on them. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Hope everybody's having a fantastic day. Like the video, and I'll see you again soon.
Chicago forever.
This is Dyson Smith.
Thank you for having me on the channel, AJ.
Yes.
Love to the community too.